Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
Welcome, everyone, to the Sports Spectrum podcast. I'm Jason Romano. Today's guest on the program is Ashley Brewer from ABC7 in Los Angeles. She's a sports anchor and reporter. Before we get to our interview with Ashley, I want to talk to you about Sports Spectrum and our Sports Spectrum magazine. Okay, so here's what you do. Go to sportspectrum.com. Find someone that you know you want to bless for $18. That's all it costs for an entire year. You can get them a subscription to the Sports Spectrum magazine. We put out a quarterly magazine. We've been doing the magazine since 1985. And listen, I'm all in on the digital side of the evolution and the platforms that have grown, especially with Sports Spectrum. Our website's been doing great. We're going to reach over 1 million people this year on the website. Our podcast, we've reached over 500,000 people almost here on the podcast. It's been wonderful to have these sort of new platforms, but there's something about holding a magazine, opening it up, seeing these wonderful pictures and reading these incredible stories on the intersection of sports and faith. And that's what Sports Spectrum magazine is about. And we believe this magazine can be a real useful tool to help people read about Jesus Christ and how sports has impacted these athletes' lives through their faith. And so here's what you can do. It's $18 for an entire year, basically less than $2 a month. You go to sportspectrum.com and click that subscribe button. And again, you can buy it for yourself if you'd like, or maybe buy two and gift one. Gift a Sports Spectrum magazine subscription to someone that you think would love to read it, whether it's a student, an athlete, someone in a youth ministry, a men's ministry at church, maybe an athletic team, a coach. I promise you this will hit on all levels as far as who it can reach, and it'll be a great gift. $18 for an entire year. Go to sportspectrum.com and subscribe today. Today's guest on the podcast is Ashley Brewer, ABC7's Los Angeles sports anchor and reporter. And I met Ashley a few years ago. I think it was about 4 years ago at the Super Bowl. It was the Seattle Seahawks and the New England Patriots, and we were at Media Night or Media Day, which was held at the Phoenix Suns Arena in Arizona. And Ashley came over and introduced herself, and we were kind of connected on Twitter, and she was beginning her broadcasting career, and I have been at ESPN for quite a while, and just, working in the business, you try to meet as many people as you can, and Ashley and I met there in Arizona. And we've stayed in touch, certainly through social media. And as I've watched her career grow all the way to Los Angeles, California, working for ABC covering sports, I just thought she'd be a great person to have on the podcast because I know her heart and I know how much she loves the Lord. She comes from a family of athletes. She's one of 5 children. All 5 of the children, 4 siblings that Ashley has, including herself, played Division I sports, Division I athletics. Ashley swam and was a really good swimmer at USC. And she even competed in the 2012 Olympic trials. So Ashley was no joke as a swimmer. And she has a brother, Charles, who was a right-handed pitcher for the Diamondbacks, a brother, Chase, who played baseball at UCLA, a brother, Connor, who was a quarterback at the University of Virginia, and her sister, Abby, who played volleyball at USC. What a family, right? But there's more to Ashley than just sports, and certainly there's more than just being, a really good athlete. But for her, it's about her faith. And I really wanted to talk to Ashley about not only her journey to Christ on her own, but what does it look like to have faith in Los Angeles, in Hollywood? Because there's so much in Hollywood is about stardom and fame and identity and achievement. And now Ashley is a believer working in LA. What does faith in Hollywood look like? So let's get to our podcast conversation with Ashley Brewer. I think you guys will like her, from ABC7 in Los Angeles, a sports anchor and reporter here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Take a listen to Ashley's story. Welcome, Ashley.
Yes, from the other coast. How's it going? Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you and catch up and just get to talk. It's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. You are in California right now. I'm in Connecticut, so we're about as opposite of the coast as you can get here in the United States. But I love your journey, Ashley. It's still so young, 26, 27 years old, and currently working as a reporter in Los Angeles covering sports. So cool. Never a dull moment, of course. The Dodgers, Rams, Lakers, so many more teams. Describe for me what it's like to cover sports in Los Angeles.
Oh my goodness. Well, right now in October, I tell people I feel like my head is spinning because there is so much going on. There's so much to keep track of. And that's kind of my job in local sports, is that I am responsible for being up to date with every single team and what's going on, because my days are all different. Like yesterday, I was at Chargers practice. Today, I'm at Rams practice. Dodgers, like it's always changing. And so it is so much fun. It's really busy, but it's such a blast. And I get to cover some of the greatest athletes in the world out here, and I get to do it in the sunshine. So I just feel so lucky to be doing this.
Yeah, you can't complain about that. Now, there's a
Nope.
great photo of you on Twitter, which I love, and Instagram recently. You were getting ready to cover the Dodgers as they clinched, I think, a playoff berth in the locker room, and you're covered in plastic and goggles and just what is an experience like that like? Because you're trying to be professional and doing your job, but you're also in a locker room that's celebrating a playoff berth.
Oh yeah, and it's hard to not like be on the level that the guys are on, because they're so excited, they're screaming, they're partying. It's like walking into a party. Honestly, the music is blasting. You walk into the locker room and the guys just take bottles and dump it over your head. I've been covering them all season, so it's been fun to have some of those personal relationships of those guys you cover. So it's almost like you feel like you want to celebrate with them, but at the same time, it's like, oh, wait, I got to talk about the game with you. We got to talk about what just happened. But I got to say, the days that I have gotten to cover the Dodgers when they've clinched either a playoff berth or on to the next round of the playoffs, those have been probably the best days of my job in the past 2 years I've been here, just because it is so much fun kind of getting to like party at work. It's so cool because obviously like you're not partying, but you get to be around it and you get to see guys who have worked so hard accomplish something really great. So yeah, it's a blast. I look like a total dork in my plastic poncho and my goggles, but it was so much fun. And hopefully we have many more to come.
Now, your mom, Deborah, was a news anchor at CBS in Phoenix for many years, where you grew up. Is broadcasting something that you always wanted to do, obviously watching your mom do it?
No, I never, ever thought that this would be my life and that this would happen. I always had people coming up to me when I was younger saying, oh, we loved your mom. She was so great on TV, because she retired to have 5 children. Yeah. So I never got to watch her as I was growing up. She was already out of the business, but I'd heard so much about it, and we'd watch clips and stuff from old tapes. And I always thought, oh, that's so cool. But I always wanted to be an Olympic swimmer. That was my dream. And I was a swimmer all throughout my life, swam in college. So that was really what I kind of considered as my identity. I was a swimmer. That was my life. And I never really thought about anything beyond that. And it really wasn't until my senior year of college. I was a sociology major, so I really had no idea what I was going to do, that I really sat down and talked with my parents and was like, yeah, I probably should get an internship. I probably should get something going here, because USC is going to end, May of 2014, and I got to figure out what I'm going to do. And so that's really, it's to me, like I think about it sometimes and I still can't believe that I am here. And I also feel like my swimming self and my TV self are like 2 different lives. They're crazy. Yeah, it's really bizarre. It's a crazy story. And that's how I know God exists, because of what he's done in my life. No,
that's awesome. I want to talk about your faith's journey in a second, but you mentioned you have your mom retired to have 5 children. So you have 4 siblings. So There's 5 of you. Now I read that you all played Division I athletics, or made it to Division I to play sports. That's kind of a big deal for one to make it D1, and you have 5.
I know.
Is sports was that always a big deal? Sports when you were a kid growing up and even into high school?
Yes. And I think some of the other parents, like growing up, were like, geez, what did you feed these kids? And I swear my parents were just unbelievable. They were so involved, and they were always present and taking us to multiple games and practices every day of my childhood. It's all I can remember was being shuttled to baseball practice, to basketball practice, to swim practice, to cheerleading, to all these different things. And I swear my mom should have run like a taxi service. It's so crazy. She was going all around Phoenix, Arizona. But from the earliest I can remember, all of our like dinner table conversations were about sports. It was about, oh, did you see Randy Johnson pitch this unbelievable game for the Diamondbacks? Did you see, this guy did this for the Suns? It was all that was like the language that I learned growing up. And so I always knew, like, if I was going to be in television someday or whatever career I was going to have, it had to be in sports because that was my world and it's really what I understood best.
You mentioned your faith for a second there before and just how good God is. When did that take shape for you? When did you grow up in a family that where faith was important? And then there's always that moment for you, for all of us, that we have to make Christ our Lord and personal Savior as opposed to, our parents' faith. Tell me about faith growing up and when, God became real to you.
I grew up in a Christian household, and I thank God for that every single day because I like to think like I almost had it the easy way. I was raised from, pretty much the time I was born, hearing the message of Jesus, hearing the gospel, from, the books my mom would read us, to praying before meals, praying before we would go to bed at night. My mom and dad just set such a great Christian example in my household growing up. And so even before sports and before all these things that were important to us, God and our faith in Christ was number one always. And so everything else just came after that. And so I grew up going to church every Sunday. We do things within the church throughout the week. All of our friends were really through church. And so I was really lucky to always understand God and his word and be in the word from a very young age. But I would say we had a group called Club 56 when I was in 5th and 6th grade in our church. And we went to camp. I remember one time during the fall, it was like a little weekend thing where we went up to northern Arizona. And I think that's where I really felt that, okay, like this is what I want my life to be all about. I feel like that's when I really made the decision to open my heart and open my life and decide to follow Jesus through that time. So I'd really say like 5th and 6th grade is when I really grasped it and have been walking ever since. And I credit my family and am so grateful for how I was raised to be where I'm at now.
You did mention a word earlier that is mentioned very often, I guess, in the sports/faith circles, which is identity. And you mentioned your identity falling into swimming and maybe even now identity being, something that you wrestle with. Was that something that you struggled through as you became a pretty good swimmer and got the scholarship to go to USC and eventually even competing in the Olympic trials, which I know you took part of? Was identity a struggle for you with your faith and then getting into sports and being so good at it?
Totally. I feel like, especially when you become very successful, it's easy to get wrapped up in it and to think so much about yourself. And it's like, oh, this is my goal. And oh, this is what I want to accomplish. And oh, this is my fame. But at the end of the day, it's not about me at all. And I think throughout my career, maybe when I would reach a certain level of success, I feel like I would always get checked. And I think I was raised in well enough and to understand, like, this is not for me and it's not about me. And I don't want this to be about me. So I would always have to check myself constantly to be like, all right, yeah, as great as this is and this accomplishment is, it is so much better to be using this as an avenue for Jesus Christ. Like, that is what this is about. I always have to remind myself, I am working for the Lord, as it says in Colossians. I am doing this job in broadcasting for my faith. I was swimming for faith. And I would always try to use that. I believe in college was really when I did it best, was that I would use swimming. I would take my teammates and shuttle them back and forth to church and to different Bible studies we do on Wednesday nights. And so I think that's when I really became active in trying to use my position as an athlete and now my position as a broadcaster into using it for my faith. It's not always easy, but I definitely, kind of go back and forth, as I think a lot of people do.
We're talking to Ashley Brewer here on the Sports Spectrum podcast from ABC7, Los Angeles sports anchor and reporter. So you get out of school and you start to do a few gigs in Arizona, including Tucson, in a few years. Yeah. You end up in Los Angeles, like you said, a couple years ago in Hollywood. So tell me the story of how that came about.
Yeah, I still can't believe it. And I still have people messaging me like, how did you do this? And I'm like, oh my gosh, by the grace of God, I don't know.
Right.
um, I worked for 2 years in Tucson. And like I said, I didn't go to journalism school. All I was a jock who grew up with jocks who really loved sports, and a mom that would call me every day and tell me what to say, what not to say. Here's how you do TV. I was really kind of self-taught throughout TV. So I got into Tucson, really learned everything about the business there, and I grinded for 2 years, like really, really tough. I dedicated all of my time, all of my personal time and personal life into trying to become a really good sportscaster. I think I improved a ton over those 2 years, and I would constantly post videos and different clips of me in Tucson out on the internet, just like hoping that someone would see it.
Sure.
And I would say about like 6 months before my contract was up there at the end of the 2 years, my old producer from ABC7 in Los Angeles, who I interned for, saw one of the videos I was doing. He said, we're keeping in touch with you through social media, and we see what you're doing, and we'd like to bring you in for an audition and see if this might be a place you'd want to come next. And I was like, this guy's got to be kidding me. I'm 24 years old. My dream was always to come back to Los Angeles at some point, but I thought maybe it would happen in like the 30s range. Typically, I really had no idea what was going to happen with my career, just because I always kind of felt behind. But I got the gig, and I just kind of like just took off and running, and I haven't looked back since, and have continued that grind that I have had in Tucson. But it's a totally different job, and it's just so much fun. And I got to say, like, when I was in Tucson, I was in such a rush to try to like get out there and try to move up in the business, and to try to like figure out, okay, what's the next best thing? I am so content and happy here, and I've found such a peace in my life, and I think in a lot, for a lot of different reasons. But being here in LA has just been the greatest thing, and I'm so lucky, and I constantly have to like pinch myself.
And then being in LA, obviously just being there where everything seems to be happening, there's so much opportunity to network and connect, and it leads to other opportunities. You were a part of the Bachelor Winter Games special, which is not just locally, that was on the national level on ABC. And suddenly you're seen by a lot more people, even though Los Angeles is huge. So tell me about not just that experience, but the idea of being in a place where you connect and build relationships and network, and all of a sudden more opportunities come.
Totally. And I think when that all happened, I was kind of reminded of like how good God was to me, because when I was in Tucson, there were other jobs that I was considering taking. One was in Boston, and I prayed for that job, and I thought I wanted that job so, so bad. And then it kind of like, I didn't hear back, whatever. Then the LA job popped up, and I was like, oh my gosh, like that's what I want. Oh my goodness. Like this is so much better. And I ended up getting the LA job. And now I always think like, holy cow, if I would have been in Boston, which I thought at the time I wanted, all of this would have never happened to me. And I can't imagine if this wasn't happening. And I feel so lucky. I've had all these blessings that I don't think really would have happened. But how the whole Bachelor thing came about was totally wild and bizarre. And the creator of The Bachelor, Mike Fleiss, who is one of the coolest guys ever, I love him. He saw me on TV one day. And that's the power of Hollywood. I mean, all of these executives and artists and directors and different people watch the news in LA. And he saw that I was hosting a Chargers pregame show. And he's a big Charger fan. And he saw me on TV, and he called the Chargers, and he said, who is that girl? Give me her phone number. I need to have her on my show. So he called me, and I'm sitting on the beach one day, and he's like, I'm Mike Fleiss. I'm the creator of The Bachelor. And I'm like, oh my goodness, he's going to try to get me to go and date The Bachelor. And I am so not doing that. I am so not doing that. I would never. But we started talking about football a little bit, and I'm kind of nervous. I was trying to like figure out, what does this guy want? And he's like, we're creating a new show, and I want you to come co-host it with Chris Harrison. And it's going to be like a Winter Olympics, but with our Bachelor contestants. And I loved the idea. We had such a great conversation. I went to meet up with him and some of the executives and Chris Harrison. And it just turned out to work out. And I just couldn't believe it happened to me. It's one of those things you never dream of, you never expect to happen to you, but it did. And it ended up being just one of the greatest experiences of my life. So that was just unbelievable.
And you got to work with Hannah, right? Hannah Storm. She was a part of that?
Yes. Yeah. And at the time when we first talked, Hannah wasn't involved, but she got involved later on and did the show with us. And what a great person to learn from and to ask questions, because I mean, she's done it all. She's seen it all. She's experienced so much in her career. She's always someone I grew up watching and idolizing in TV. And to sit down and have dinner with her every night, to get to ask her, hey, how did this look? What did this look like? That was just so valuable. And she was so kind and so cool and just became like a friend to me. Same thing with Chris Harrison. I mean, he's now one of my best friends and I just adore him and can't thank both of them enough for all of the things that they've taught me and how they mentored me through those few weeks that we filmed.
So cool. We're talking to Ashley Brewer here on the podcast. Ashley, what's faith? This is going to be a generic question and I'll let you answer it however you want. What's faith in Hollywood like? What is that like?
You know, I moved out here to come to USC, and I remember being freaked out because the only Christian I knew was Matt Barkley, and he was the quarterback of the football team, and we had connected through social media, and I really, really liked him as a friend because he was outspoken and everyone knew he was a Christian. So that was the first person I really connected with. Like, okay, where do you go to church? Where should I go to church? Do you guys do a small group? So I instantly had like a mini crew of Christian friends at USC, but it was nothing like I had experienced when I went to University of Texas, which I went to for 2 years before transferring. And I was freaked out because I would go to FCA in Texas and there were 50 people there. And then we had an Athletes in Action at USC and there was 6 maybe on a good night. And I was just like, oh my gosh. And I would mention to my teammates, bringing them to church. When I'd mention it in Texas, everyone was on board. When I'd mention it here, people would be like, what is that? Like, it was like, what? Like, no, I got stuff to do. I want to go out. I want to do this. And so it was a different world. And then I met a friend through a mutual friend through church that said, hey, we do this thing on Wednesday nights. And this pastor named Judah Smith flies down from Seattle once a week, and he speaks at a ballroom in Beverly Hills at the Montage Hotel. And I remember walking in, and I had no idea. I had no idea who Judah was at the time. I didn't know the people that were there, but it was essentially like a celebrity Bible study where you would see some of the biggest celebrities in LA, but they were coming to hear the word. And it opened my eyes to the fact that I am so not alone here. And like, there are so many people that I wouldn't assume that would be in church that are coming to church. And this church has grown like you would not believe. We now meet in a big theater in Hollywood and it's still going strong, like now 5 years later. But God has done so much in LA. I would say from my time, the past 5-6 years here, it is become normal. It's become something like, oh yeah, you go to church home on Wednesdays? Me too. Like, oh, I've heard of people that go to that church, or I've heard of Judah. And it's now, and I give a lot of thanks to social media that people see it now and they kind of recognize what it is. And I think it's just become more talked about, more prevalent. I do think, yeah, of course, in Hollywood, there are so many dark areas and we live in a broken and dark world, and it's very prevalent here in Los Angeles. But I am so encouraged by all of the amazing believers that I see just on Sundays and on Wednesdays here in LA, because it's really cool.
That is awesome. And I think, because we're never going to out anybody who goes to this. That's not fair to anyone. But I just think the idea of knowing that there's people there in Hollywood who maybe because of one reason or another, they're not just going to wear shirts with crosses on them and walk around with Bibles in their hands, but they still have a faith that's important to them. Totally. And just in being a part of that, what's that done for you as far as growing in your faith? Now, I'm not going to call you a celebrity, Ashley, but people are watching you and seeing you. We hate that word, right? But they are knowing, and recognizing you, I'm sure. So what has that done for your faith to stay grounded in the Lord? Because now you are getting recognized and there's people saying, hey, you're awesome. Great job. I watched you, et cetera, et cetera.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, the one thing I'm so grateful for my faith is that it always does ground me and reminds me of like, all right, what am I really doing here on earth? Like, what is the purpose? Why have I been given this platform? I always search myself and think to myself, like, what am I doing? Am I doing it in the right way? Am I being an example? And am I in my heart really desiring the things that I should be desiring? Or am I getting too excited about being sometimes, like, I wouldn't say famous, but being recognized
Sure.
and, having success here on earth, because we know that fades quickly and that's not, why we're here. But I think having a church like that and being around some of the people and mentors I've had, they've always done a good job of kind of reminding me like, all right, like, that's so cool. Like, you got this gig. All right. Like, let's see like how you can shine your light through that. And what do you think may come out of this? And what opportunities for God and for Christ do you think that you can do? And so I've always like tried to kind of think about those things when something exciting does happen. Like, okay, well, what is the purpose of this? What is God trying to do through my life? And maybe it opens up doors to meeting people. What can you do in their lives? Like, I always do think about maybe the purpose, that why these things are happening. It's not about me.
Have you had opportunities, and maybe there's a story to share, of you being able to share your faith without obviously forcing it on anyone, but just conversations come up? Maybe you're praying for someone, maybe just conversations in the workplace or being out and about, covering sports. You get to meet so many people. Has there been an opportunity for you, a story here or there maybe, that you've been able to kind of talk about faith with other people?
Totally. And like, of course it happens sometimes with coworkers, because they'll ask like, oh, what'd you do today on a Sunday? Well, I went to church with my family on Sunday morning and I do this. And you kind of get to talk to people about kind of what you do just day to day. And,
Yeah.
I have some coworkers who are like, oh, you're so busy. Why do you do that? And you kind of get to talk with them about why it's so important to do those kind of things. But some of my favorite conversations I have are actually with some of the athletes that I interview. And it's cool because I always talk to the people I'm interviewing before or afterwards, because I just like talking and I like to get to know people. But I love like getting to talk to guys like Clayton Kershaw. And some of the guys on the Chargers. Like, I had a great conversation with Hunter Henry, whose dad was a pastor. He's the tight end with the Chargers.
Yeah.
And I get to talk with these guys, and they talk about their faith and why they feel like their platform was given to them and what they're doing with it. And I love, 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 like, getting to know these people and understanding like why they are the way they are and how they act the way they act. It's really cool, and just learning. And it makes you want to root for them so much more, but it also makes you appreciate so much what they're doing for other people. Like, I tell people, I don't know how much people know about Clayton Kershaw and what he does. I mean, we know what he does on the field, and that's unbelievable, but the things he does overseas through his foundation, Kershaw's Challenge, and how much that guy is serving the Lord and serving others. I mean, that's the coolest thing. So I just love the little conversations I have through interviews with athletes. And it just kind of also like you give a little head nod when you see them, because it's like, oh, we kind of get it. We're all in the same corner. We're all rooting for each other, and we all have a greater purpose here on earth.
Couple more questions here with Ashley Brewer on the podcast. Your Twitter bio, Ashley, lists Matthew 5:16. I'm going to read that verse real quick. It says, "In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." Tell me about that verse and what it means to you, why you have that verse specifically on your Twitter bio.
Yeah, that is one that has literally been, I think, in my bio since I've had a Twitter, because that has been one of my favorite life verses ever since I was younger. I've always been joyful, and I think I've always been a very happy, upbeat person. And people have always kind of, I think, been like, oh, is that like genuine? Is she real? Like, is she legit? I have experienced so much joy through my faith. And I think that is evident to other people. And I think that's something that I consider my light. And so I think that people sometimes look at me and look at other Christians and say, gosh, they're really happy, or they're really positive and optimistic during hard times. What is it about them? And I think in that verse it's a lot about like how you shine your light and you show what God has done in your life. And so I think people could look at that and say, man, God has really blessed her in her career, but he's also blessed her personally. And he's also made her a really happy person to be around and a really loving person. And I want to be like that. And I think in a dark world, we need more people to get to shine God's light and to shine the blessings that he's put in your life. And then also the part about good deeds and other people seeing that, to know that you're doing that to give glory to God. You know, you don't want to like show off too much all the good things you're doing in the world, but I do think it's just being an example in this world. The way you treat people, the way you love others, the way you treat your enemies, the way you pray. I think so much people see things like that and they wonder, oh, what's that Jesus guy that she's so obsessed with or she's, you know, talking about? Like, what is that? And I think it kind of like sparks people and makes them open their eyes a little bit and kind of just wonder, what is that all about? And at the end of the day, that's what we're here on earth for, is to be able to shine our lights to others and to just try to just be open to everybody.
Ashley Brewer, thanks so much for joining us here on the podcast. I got one more question for you. We always ask this to all of our guests.
Cool.
And it's a simple question, sometimes not a simple answer. But right now, where God has you, it sounds like an amazing place in Los Angeles, doing great things for him and great things for ABC. What has God been teaching you during this season of life? What are you learning from the Lord?
I think over the past year, and I was not always like this, as I shared earlier, but over the past year, I have really come to peace with where I'm at. And I talked a little bit about in Tucson, I was like rushing to get out of there. I couldn't wait to see what's next and how good I could be and what jobs I could get. I have learned, and it talks about this in Philippians, I have learned to be content no matter where I am in life, whether things are really bad or really good. And I've experienced both. And you experience them in your job and your personal life. I have just learned that life is so much easier when you're trusting God with everything and trusting his plan for you and obeying his plan and the things that he puts in front of you. So I've just really I'm proud of myself and I'm so grateful for the peace God has given me, because I finally have relaxed a little bit, where I'm not looking at what's the next best thing. When can I get married? When am I going to get that big, huge job that I think I'm capable of? I don't worry about a lot of those things anymore, because I ultimately trust what God has already done in my life. And I know that he will continue to do so as long as I continue to have faith in him and I continue to trust him. And so he continues to show me over and over again, like he is faithful. And I don't know if you know Scott Hansen. I think he was on the podcast.
Yeah, I know Scott very well. He's a great guy.
Scott's one of my best friends in the world. We go to that church together. And the other night we had dinner and a movie, and we were talking about this song that we sing in church. I know that I've seen God move mountains, and I believe he can do it again. Mm-hmm. And God has moved mountains in my life, in your life, in Scott's life. We were just talking about how many times we've seen him be faithful and do things we'd never thought he could do, because we're like, oh, this is too big. This is impossible. But he always does. And so the next thing I get worried about, or the next job I don't get, or whatever it may be, God is going to move the mountains. He's done it before. He'll do it again. And so I always just try to remember that and know that he is so faithful in my life, and he'll continue to do that.
Ashley Brewer, this has been great to talk to you, my friend. So so thankful for you, and thanks for coming on the podcast. And hopefully we'll catch up again sometime, maybe even in person, and sit down and have a longer conversation.
Really hope so. Thank you so much. And thanks so much for having me on. It's really an honor to be a part of this podcast, and so proud of what you're doing as well.
And we do thank Ashley Brewer, ABC7's Los Angeles sports anchor and reporter, for joining us here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. I really enjoyed hearing Ashley's journey to faith. I really loved hearing her stories about working in Los Angeles. And really, my favorite was hearing about faith in Hollywood. What does that look like? Just being surrounded with other believers in Hollywood, in the Los Angeles area, and staying grounded in your faith. And a very tough place to do that in the LA, California area. So appreciate Ashley. You can follow her on Twitter at ABC7Ashley, and on Instagram as well. That's at ABC7 Ashley. Thanks, Ashley, for joining us. We thank you for listening to this podcast. You can reach us on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram at sports_spectrum. You can email me, jason@sportsspectrum.com. We'd love to hear your guest ideas. So email those. Any ideas of people that you think we should have on the podcast, you can email them, jason@sportsspectrum.com, or you can just tweet at me at Jason Romano and tell me who you think we should be having on the podcast. We also want to encourage you to go to sportspectrum.com, sportspectrum.com. That's where all of our content is found. Daily devotionals, articles on the intersection of sports and faith, first-person increased stories from athletes themselves, and video content. All sorts of great stuff there at sportspectrum.com. And also, lastly, I want to tell you to subscribe to the magazine. It's $18, an amazing deal right now for an entire year, $18, and you get the Sports Spectrum magazine, 4 issues, quarterly magazine, plus a couple bonus issues, including a welcome issue. It's good stuff, man. I'm telling you, get that magazine for just $18 for an entire year. Go to sportspectrum.com and subscribe today. Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast, and we'll see you next time. My name is Jason Romano. Have a great rest of your day. This is the Sports Spectrum Podcast. Have a great one.